Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both, the podcast all about how our multiple passions and interests shape our identity and our lives. My name is Pam Schaefer, and I am a musician and therapist in Los Angeles, and I also happen to be your host. This podcast is produced by Laura Studeris, and for this season, we've partnered up with Under the Radar magazine. If you like what you hear, you can hang out with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram at WNB the podcast. And if you really, really like what you hear, please support us on Patreon. We are under Why Not Both podcast. When you join our Patreon, you get a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff and you get to chat with us. And that's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy our interviews. For this week's episode, we welcomed John Linnell of They Might Be Giants. I hope you enjoy our chat. I like that Zoom interrupted you saying, I hope that these pearls of wisdom are being recorded to inform you that it's being recorded. Oh, that's technology in a nutshell, that you're like, I hope it's catching this. And technology's like, oh, I am.
Yes.
Also derailing it.
Right. This emotionless robotic voice, like I am so unamused by what you're saying, but yeah.
Welcome to Why Not Both, where we rhapsodize about panicked and sleeping animals and technology interrupts us. It's a good start to any podcast, really.
Yes. How are you?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. It's I feel like David Lynch being like, it's 72 degrees, sunny, very still. It is quite lovely.
Well, the weather's been miserable everywhere, and now maybe it's not so bad. So
yeah.
And you're boiling hot in LA, right? Recently.
Yeah, we had a kind of like, I don't know. Do you spend much time in LA?
Well, no, I visit. I come to play in LA, but I've never really stayed there for an extended amount of time.
Ah, we're a magical and strange city. Mm-hmm. And we often have, there's a heat wave that's always either at the high holidays or Halloween. It's one of the two.
Right.
It's proximal to one of those two things. Like ever since I was a kid, there's always, and I would remember it because it would either mean that I was sitting in Temple with my parents being like way too hot, or you'd plan like an amazing Halloween costume and then be like really,
oh God, yeah,
really sweaty.
Yeah. Yeah, even just the plastic mask, like the sensation of sweat inside them and the smell of the mask when you're sweating.
Yep.
It's very potent childhood memory. Well, it's appropriately cool here in New York State. It's actually really good trick-or-treating weather that I think we're having. So
excellent. Do you have? It's funny. I feel like every neighborhood has its own like trick-or-treating culture.
Mm-hmm.
What is the trick-or-treating culture like where you are? Is it like roving packs of children? Are there teenagers that sneak in there? Like, where's the best place to find the good candy?
Oh yeah. Well, I can give you a better description of what it was like when I was growing up, which is that we lived in a 20-story apartment building, and it was crazy how much stuff you'd get, because you barely had to do any walking. You just walk from one door to the one next to it. And my older brother and sister would have garbage bags because that's how much candy they were accumulating. And then they basically do the entire building and then say, we're going to go next door and do the apartment building next door.
Oh,
and
my God.
I was too young to actually go outside on Halloween night. So just be in the building. But yeah, that was like the most efficient possible Halloween you could have. And then when I was a little bit older, we moved to the suburbs of Boston, and you'd spend most of the evening walking from one house to another. That they were all very long walks.
Yeah.
So that was a completely different experience.
Oh my goodness. I love the idea of just like almost like fleecing an entire apartment building.
Yeah, exactly. It was was it, like the Anderson tapes? What was the movie about the apartment building
Oh
theft?
my gosh. And then there's like what flashed in my mind. I was just like, you could even like probably wear different costumes and hit the same places.
You could, I'm sure.
Right.
People did, no doubt.
I wish I could remember the name of that media. I was talking to another interviewee yesterday and realized that it's almost like, I don't know if this happens to you, but if someone says to you, like, what's your favorite movie or what music are you listening to right now? Does your mind just completely go blank and all of a sudden your mind is like, I've never seen a film?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or you immediately think of some really mediocre thing that you've just been obsessing on, that like that's all you can come up with.
Yes,
You,
yes. You just get stuck on it and you're like, okay, I guess I have to say it and it's going to
you talk
reflect
about
poorly
this thing.
upon me.
It was a really incredibly boring thing that I saw a long time ago, but that's why I can't stop thinking about it for some reason.
Exactly. A friend of mine said that he comes up with stock answers so that even if they're not his favorite of the moment, that way, like he just pulls up his stock
Oh, yeah,
answer.
yeah,
I was like,
Raging Bull.
oh, yeah, just like he just pulled the ripcord and I was just like, okay, Raging Bull is coming out. Oh my goodness. What has your relationship been like with media at this time? It's been really fascinating talking to creators because all of
Mhm.
us both consumed and made media during the last like few years, but it seems like it felt quite different.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. I'm sort of a random. I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not very like. Uh, I don't do like that many deep dives. Oh, I should say, like, I like watching um, uh, rock documentaries,
Ooh.
and I'll kind of watch any rock documentary, and often it's like bands I don't even particularly like, but there's something so fascinating about getting all the way through somebody's career and going like, oh, how weird that like this happened, and
Mm.
then they went and did this whole other thing with involving pro wrestling or something, and I will, yeah. I mean, there's also there's just bands that were kind of unavoidable when I was growing up, like like Chicago or something like that,
Mhm,
where I'll
mhm.
just watch the thing to kind of get to the bottom of this thing that I wasn't ever really that interested in, but like it obviously meant a lot in the culture, and then I kind of want
Yeah.
to know the whole story. So I really do. I really I actually watched the Frank Zappa uh, film, the documentary about Frank
Oh,
Zappa last night, and I haven't thought about Frank Zappa in probably 20 years or something, but it was just interesting and weird to go back and revisit his whole career.
oh my gosh. I've been wanting to watch that. I've been reading Pamela DeBar's book. I'm with the band.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She's in it. She's in it. She talks to the camera. Um, yeah, and I suppose the nice thing about it is that even though he's passed away, it's not just like hagiography. Like there are those, and I can tolerate a certain amount of that, but it's
Mhm.
actually sort of critical of him as a person,
Mm.
in the ways that seem truthful.
Right.
His own children are saying, yeah, he was kind of a not their dad and stuff like
Right.
that. So that was it was it was good. It got pretty deep into it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that his kids were talking about that. That's another thing that people have mentioned during this time is almost like a redefinition of being an artist and a parent because during the last like year and a half, everyone was also not just working from home, but working from home with their kids. And some people had grown kids come home and things like that. Um, and that was something I'd always talked to female artists about, but now artists of all genders are talking about that, about how to balance essentially like showing up for your kids and showing up as an artist. And it's
It's
tricky.
difficult, and there's alarming evidence that people who are really, really interesting and really committed to their work are unfortunately have to be sort of absentee family members. Um, and I don't want to do that. So I obviously have to sacrifice thing in the creative work in order to be not just the invisible dad.
Yeah. Well, because it requires so much like emotional and generative energy, even like in, like you said, in family relationships too. Like I remember, reading about like Nabokov's wife, essentially.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that it's like you end up having almost like this like other person that sacrifices their personhood for your stuff. And I'm like, oh, well, as much as I love creating things, I don't want to like accidentally do that to someone else. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. 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 I don't know I don't know about, was it Vera? Is that the name of his wife?
yeah.
Uh, I guess they were sort of like, the family was like a cult of Nabokov, right? Because the son wound up being the kind of curator of his
Yeah.
work after the fact, and you think, yeah, that's kind of weird. I mean, it wouldn't be nice if you were not into it. Um, if you felt like, I want to have my own life.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I suppose maybe I'm kidding myself, but I think my sense is that my son is not particularly doesn't is not slavishly devoted to the work of They Might Be Giants. So that's good news, I think, probably for both of us.
I think that means you did good.
I hope so.
How did you, because you've had it was interesting that you spoke about like kind of seeing the trajectory of people's careers over time. And to my knowledge, you haven't gone into pro wrestling, but you have done a lot of other things.
We've done a lot of things in sort of in the second half of or what is so far the second half of our trajectory. We started out doing really strictly just uh, I guess rock albums for grown-ups, from 1986 to about 1999, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then we really abruptly took a turn into all sorts of other stuff. Started doing commercial work, uh, songs for movies and television, and we started making children's records, and we did all kinds of outside stuff that I think we would have been too uptight to do
Mm.
um, before before. Sorry, just getting a stupid text. Um,
Story of my life.
uh, uh, yeah, yeah. Uh, we were uptight about being perceived as something other than, the thing is, the crazy thing is, our first album has a kind of a very childlike illustration on the front. It looks a little bit like H.A. Ray. It's actually this very popular artist named Rodney Greenblatt
Mm-hmm.
um, did the work, the cover art for our first album. But it looks a little, like childish, and as a result, Tower Records, when they received it, they immediately filed it into their children's section. And John and I were, of course, mortified at the time.
Oh.
We really wanted everyone to know what it was we're doing, and so we probably spent the next 15 years really fretting about it, and then eventually we kind of relaxed and realized, like, oh, we know who we are. Everybody else who's who's heard of us by now has a sense of who we are, so we
Yes.
could try doing other stuff, and it won't confuse anybody.
Mm. I just imagine going into Tower Records on Sunset and being like, you put our record where?
Yeah, no,
Like,
yeah.
oh, hey, my camera started working. Hey, Zoom.
Hey there, nice, nice piano you got there.
Yeah, that's my baby. Her name is Iphigenia. My internet was being so weird today that I was just like, I don't know if the camera will ever turn on, and it finally did. And I'm like, good job, internet, but well done. um,
Exactly.
but thinking about people taking you seriously in that way, like I'm wondering what shifted that you found that security to be like, you know what, we know who we are, other people know who we are, we can expand beyond this, because that sounds like an important artistic turning point.
It was, well, I think it was partly age. We when we were in our middle 20s, which is when the first record came out, we were worried, about selling out, and also B, about being perceived to be selling out. And that carried on for a while. And I think it was a lot of things that like you worry about it that are connected to your identity. I think there's a thing for any, like, like particularly for like teenagers, that you really are just more concerned about how you're being perceived, and
Mm-hmm.
who everyone thinks you are, and so on.
Yeah.
And you really start to relax as you get older about that stuff. Start to think, I don't think people care that much anymore.
Yeah, usually people are kind of concerned with themselves first. I've noticed that like whenever I'm worried that someone is misperceiving me, I remind myself like they're probably just thinking about their own stuff. And if there's a problem, they can say something about it and then we can
That,
address it. Like
that's totally right. So obviously now we're John and I are in our 60s now, and we kind of feel like we're still very committed to this project. We like writing songs, and we like finding new ideas and making them happen and all that. And that's now, in some ways, I feel like we have this freedom to kind of continue doing that without getting distracted by the sort of concerns of our public image or any of that stuff. I think.
well, and that's amazing also to have that long of a creative partnership that you continue to explore new ideas together.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know whether it's amnesia or something, but like we kind of feel like we still haven't said the thing yet, and it may be that like we're just kidding ourselves, and we're saying some version of the same thing over and over again. I suppose that's the thing that you want to avoid, is just doing a kind of a pale version of what you've already done. But it doesn't seem to me like we're doing that. I feel like we're always surprising ourselves, and that's actually in a way the idea.
Yeah.
Kind of come up with something where you go, oh wow, this is not this is shaping up to be something unexpected. I think that's a nice thing.
Well, that's always what's so fun, at least for me, about creating, is that I don't think I'd want to create something if what I was working on in the moment didn't feel like the next best thing I've made. I mean, like it turns out usually 9 out of 10 things that I make, I'm not gonna like show to anybody else, because then like in the process or when I conclude them, I'm like, well, I'm glad I made that, but I kind of want to make something else. And then you kind of filter through and you cherry pick. But it's like if you're not excited while you're making it, I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why would you?
Yeah, exactly. No, you need to. I mean that, and then this is where John and I began, as we had been doing other stuff earlier that was sort of like, well, what do people want to hear? And it was like, we'll try and find that thing. And then at a certain point, we realized, like, we should just do stuff that we like, and then if somebody else likes it, that's a win. But otherwise, you don't necessarily want to be successful doing something that you don't actually like yourself. That would be sort of a purgatory situation.
I was gonna say that would be, what is it, like a Pyrrhic victory where like both people win and lose? It's like
Exactly.
Well, it's amazing that you've gotten to do things like that and that you have found people that have really just like over the years resonated with your music. I mean, I can't think of any other bands that are you, essentially. Like you carved out your own lane. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I suppose that seems fair. Like, I mean, there's a lot of bands out there, and they're bands that I feel professionally jealous of out there. I won't say who they are, but I think we are definitely ourselves. We're definitely not copying somebody else. So that's something.
Well, and did you find that when you started to write for other opportunities, like you said, for TV, or even like, it's interesting that we were talking about being a parent, and then you said that you were writing then music for kids. Like, what is it like when you're kind of like using your own voice, obviously, but writing for a prompt or writing for a specific thing other than just like, hey, write what you're compelled to write?
Well, it's easier in some ways because it's obviously you're more focused. We did a bunch of projects for Disney where they just, we just came up with a theme, like do all songs about the alphabet, and it's still difficult to make it interesting. I think that's the big challenge is like take something sort of that's been done quite a lot and do your own version that seems original and interesting and compelling in some way, and for kids, like make it
Yeah.
kids like it, because you can't just sleepwalk your way through that stuff. Like kids are just as critical as adults, um, uh, so and the other thing, for example, we did um, a bunch of donut ads. Like this was like 15 years ago.
Hmm.
We were asked to do. We did like a million little jingles for Dunkin Donuts, and they came up with the copy. So the lyrics were already sort of written more or less, or just the key line in the lyrics, and then it was just like a short song that took off from that. And that was one of the funnest projects we've ever done because it was really just about designing the music around this idea.
My goodness.
And they kind of wanted us to do us, they kind of wanted us to do like a They Might Be Giantsy thing. So we didn't feel like we had to guess, what vibe they were going for. We could just come up with something that seemed interesting and, maybe strange and hilarious from our perspective. And they were happy with that. That worked. So we've done other projects for people where it's been misery and there's been endless revisions, and that's the obviously the risk you run is that
Right.
you don't know what they want and they don't know what they want, and you just keep coming up with stuff over and over again, toiling over crap basically, and that's very miserable. And then even if you get paid a lot, you still feel dirty.
That's,
So,
I
so
was,
yeah,
yeah.
there's integrity projects that are fun, and then there's super commercial projects that can also be fun. Um,
I was just imagining, like, I mean, I know that I'm guilty of this when I'm talking to like my mixer, where I'm just like, can you make this sound more like you're in a glacier? Where it's like I will sometimes say just ridiculous things,
yeah,
but like
yeah.
the
And then
worst, yeah,
they're free to kind of interpret that.
yeah.
Obviously, there's no objective way to do
There's
that.
there's
So
no like glacier plugin.
exactly,
Like,
if there
but
were, you could just reach for it yourself. Like,
exactly.
but no, you get somebody who knows, some has some ideas of their own, maybe.
I'm wondering, I'm like, what was the line that Dunkin Donuts had you put in? Like I was like, because you would want to make it, like in my head, I was like, oh, you'd want to make it catchy, but you'd want to make it fun and quirky. And I'm like, what was the line? Like, do you
Right.
remember
Well, it
what
was
the line
all
was?
the ad copy was all really ordinary stuff that you do, and it didn't generally have to do with eating donuts. Or I mean, they were. I think they were promoting the coffee. They were starting to introduce like little cans and things like that.
Oh,
But it wasn't necessarily about that. Like the line that they'd submit would be just like um, uh, taking a power walk through the industrial park or something. Like it would be that, and then we'd go, all right, great, we'll do a whole song that's just, I mean, or it would be like 30 seconds,
right.
even really for us that's really a treat because it's you have such a small canvas, and
Yes.
it's a great way to write a little song. It's just like, here's a line, it's very short, blah blah blah. Oh, and then John Goodman was doing the voiceover, so
Oh my God.
there'd be a little whole, you'd do the song up to uh,
Yes.
15 seconds, and then he would say something, and then you just say the refrain again, and it was really fun. I
I'm
loved it.
imagining like if you did that, but with say like 4 or 5 bands, just gave them that like one line prompt. Because there's a project on YouTube where people they'll give different producers, like 4 different producers, one sample
Hmm.
and see what they do with that sample.
Right,
I'm
right.
like, oh my God, I wonder. if we could have like the alternate reality like Dunkin Donuts has.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where every ad is the same lyric, but it's all done differently.
Yes.
Hey,
Oh my
sure.
gosh.
Why not? Get your ad agency going.
Exactly. I was
Make
just
it
like, that'll
happen.
be my next project. I do love the coffee from Dunkin Donuts. Um, they did a good job with that. And I was thinking about what you said about like that you're like, yeah, in some projects you're just like, ugh, I feel dirty accepting money for this. And that even you had said before, like that you didn't want to be a sellout. And I feel like over time, like the idea of kind of selling out has changed. Like the idea of being an artist and getting money. I talk to people about this a lot about like, why do we feel bad when we get money for our art? And why do we also feel bad when we don't get money for our art? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this
yeah.
weird double bind.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's partly because it's the relationship between you and the person who's paying you it can feel weird,
Yeah.
uh, and it makes you question, your own motivation. So you want to do stuff that you feel like you own. You want to feel ownership of it. Um, you know, uh, that was the weird thing about doing the donut ads was we felt like these are our song. Even though we hadn't written the lyrics and there was an assignment, we kind of felt like a weird ownership of it. Um, so that was kind of a nice, eye-opening experience.
Yeah. Because what, I guess, how do you feel being an artist that has made their living like on their art? Because some people choose to like, kind of separate their art from commerce, and some
Mhm.
people like they're tied together. I guess
Yeah.
what has your experience been of that, that like those are the same for you?
Um, I don't know. I think I do actually. I think I do compartmentalize to some extent when I'm doing the songwriting for this band because I don't. I I hope I'm not deluding myself, but I think that I'm thinking about the song and not about how much money it's going to generate.
Right.
That's not really in my head, and it would be really distracting if I did start to think in those terms.
Quite so.
So that's not true of some commercial work that we do, and that's it's just a different feeling. Like you're like, oh, this isn't zingy enough or something, and it's not because it'll be better. It's just because it'll be performing its function,
Yeah.
uh, in this commercial way. Um, yeah, yeah. John is actually better, I think. At John, my partner John is more clear about those things where he has a better sense of what things mean in the culture, you know, and that includes us, but it also includes when we're doing commercial work or doing a project for something else.
Got it.
You know, I often feel like I'm just like a little bit of a performing dog in some ways, where I'm just like, I don't know, this is what I do. I'm glad somebody likes it. I have no idea why. You
You're
know,
like, I'm just along for the ride.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, to some extent, it's maybe I have some imaginary idea of what people are into, but we really began this thinking we just have to figure out what we like and hope that
Yeah.
likes it, and that's been the main engine of what the way that we work.
Well, and did either of you like, because you said that you started the band, it sounded like in your mid 20s, like did you have other jobs at the time? Like I find it
Yeah,
fascinating to see like what were you doing while you
yeah,
were musicking?
yeah. Well, that was also that there was a benefit to that, which was John and I both did freelance work in New York in the 1980s. Actually started as a bike messenger. Um,
Oh,
by the time we by the time we were really into this, and trying to get trying to make a record and stuff like that, um, I was working in a dark room, doing for audiovisual companies.
whoa.
work this enormous thing called a stat camera, which people my age may remember. It was like a huge camera that you'd use to photograph two-dimensional art, and then you could take the negative and do other stuff with it. And it was a complicated process, no longer necessary and completely obsolete technology, but at the time it was a key part of any audiovisual company. They always had a stat room on site, and they had this giant camera that was the size of a, like a size of a washing machine. And so that was my job. And John was doing paste up for publishing companies, so mostly for Condé Nast, and he was laying out magazine pages, stuff like that. And so and as I said, we worked freelance, so we were able to book gigs and things, and take jobs that were that didn't conflict with that schedule. So we could kind of, it was a little complicated, but we could kind of like get gigs and do recording sessions and stuff and still manage to keep those jobs.
Right.
And then at a certain point, I think the thing was we weren't necessarily making enough money to quit our jobs, but we had to stop freelancing because nobody wanted to hire us because we were both so unavailable. So there was this sort of lean period where we kind of had to, the work had to kind of taper off, but we were not really making enough money off They Might Be Giants.
Yeah.
That was a little bit dodgy, but then luckily for us, that eventually picked up. We made a record, and then we started actually touring like a real band, getting into a van and driving around, sleeping on the bench in the van.
Yep. I was like sleeping in weird places, eating a lot of peanut butter.
Yeah, exactly. Eating bar food.
Yeah.
But making enough to live on and able to quit our day jobs. So that was lucky for us.
And I love that both of your day jobs prior to this came in remarkably handy to make the book that you made. I just thought of that. I was like,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, John is the real visual artist of the two of us. He got an art degree, and he has been the one kind of managing the packages all this time. He's very much very into design and packaging and art, and he vets the video artists that we work with, and so that's really been his purview. So that was also lucky that he was so involved with that we kind of had an aesthetic right away.
It's so funny. I was just like, it sounds like he has all these kind of like galaxy brain ideas, and you're like, I'm here to bring the vibes. It sounds like a really good balance.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Because like I was thinking about that, especially because you have been in creative partnership for a long time, that you need to balance each other. Like it wouldn't be.
I think we're very aware of our respective strengths and weaknesses, and we're pretty comfortable in our roles. So that's good. That's worked in our favor. I think we also, to some extent, I think we kind of emulate each other. Like I think like, no, how can I do something like what he did? So I think there is an element of that going on. But yeah, John is the kind of the more outgoing and more he does most of the talking on stage.
Yes.
And I'm kind of fiddling around with the gear and kind of interested in the matter with the dog is going crazy right now.
Oh, hi Pupper. Hello. I was like, does your dog want to be included?
I don't know.
That is the joy of Zoom, is seeing it's like, show me the baby, show the creature. Yes. Oh, hello.
She's kind of the sociopath of the two of them. Um, she's not a very nice dog to other dogs, and I always feel like this bad will ambassador when I go out taking them out, because she just is like lunging at small children and other dogs. It's not a good scene, but she's okay right now.
My best friend's dog, she loves me, and obviously, I mean, she loves my best friend, and she also loves my best friend's bandmate. Um, that's it.
She doesn't love other people. Yeah,
She is terrified of other people.
this one is kind of like that a bit.
Yeah.
And then we actually had this unfortunate tour once where the driver insisted on bringing her Chihuahua, and I don't know why we didn't just put our feet down and say no, but the dog accompanied us on the I think the pretty much the whole tour, and it was this vicious little animal. Like, you know
Oh,
what
yeah.
Chihuahuas can be like that.
It can go either way. They're either like baby angels, or you're like, are you possessed?
Yeah. Well, this dog hated everybody, and and we're in a bus, and the dog is freaking out even when we stop to a toll booth or something. Starts wanting to kill whoever's showing up in the window. So we had no dogs on the bus now. I think we learned our lesson.
Oh my goodness. That sounds spicy.
Anyway, I was talking about something, and then the dog interrupted, and I kept forgetting what it was.
Dogs are important. We were talking about like the dynamic of bandmates, that it's like,
Oh, right, yeah. So John, right. So I'm kind of like the music, technician, like in terms of the
yes.
nuts and bolts, the like I'll do the horn arrangements and stuff like that, and then John is exhorting the crowd, and like,
Yes. Well, you need like the front person. Like, it's so hard to do both the technical musical aspects while being a front person. It's nearly impossible to do those at the same time.
yeah.
So it's good to divvy that up. Like, when people do those at the same time, I'm just kind of like, are you okay? Like, I don't know if you've seen like Marc Rebillet perform, but like he's performing both like just incredibly complex, like improvised music, but also is
Mm,
like beaming energy from like 1,000 fiery suns. And I'm just like,
yeah. Yeah, that's usually it's like the Mick and Keith thing where you have like
yeah,
two different roles. Uh,
exactly. Well, and it speaks to your strengths, because it's like, you don't strike me as the person that's like, you know what, I want to be a front person. I'm just like, you seem like you're like, no, I'd like to fiddle with the 8,000.
yeah, everybody has their own. I mean, I don't even know if it's that like well defined, but I did a solo tour once, and it was kind of fun, kind of interesting, but it was a lot more work.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I like this setup. Actually, there was a period before John and I had a band where for about 10 years we were just a duo. We had a tape recorder, and then once we started hiring other musicians, we realized like this is so much easier. Like we we have other people, just their very presence on stage made the whole vibe much
Yeah.
much less stressful. Where we're no longer having to juggle all the balls. Um, that
Yes.
was a real eye opener, because it's weird that when you're a smaller band, it's actually more nerve wracking.
Yeah.
I imagine it's even worse if you're just like a solo performer.
It's hard. Yeah, like you said, that it was interesting, but then you can actually, with a band, like generate that energy on stage, and you're not accountable for like every single thing that's happening whilst
Yeah,
connecting with your audience.
yeah, and you feel this kind of safety in numbers too.
Exactly. How has it been? Do you two live near each other? Because I was thinking about like working on music during this time.
Right. Well,
Um,
as you know, it's not really that necessary anymore.
yeah.
I mean, proximity doesn't matter except when you're actually needing to work in a room together.
Yes.
So, which is, we do that eventually we John and I each write songs, or we start working on sounds or something, and then we'll often exchange things electronically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gotten easier and easier as we've gone along.
Yes.
But I mean, that was something we did. You know, as I recall, we would exchange floppy disks at one point by the late 1980s into the 1990s. That was a kind of a typical way that we'd
That's
collaborate, where we
fantastic.
didn't have to be together, but we could say like, here's the beats, or here's
Yes.
some samples or whatever, and or here's a sequence. Um, and So we've kind of continued in that vein. Our new album book is has a number of examples of that kind of collaboration. There's some sounds that John cooked up that he sent over to me, and then I wrote a song on top of that, and vice versa. There's one wonderful track that he did on top of some noises that I made. So we've been doing that, yeah, pretty consistently. There's been every album we've had some version of that going on, and his home studio is in upstate New York, but in a completely different part of upstate. You know, upstate New York's pretty big, and he is down near Pennsylvania, kind of next to the water gap, the Delaware water gap. And that is about as far as, I mean, it's actually so far from where I am here. I'm in Albany County, that in order to get from here to John's house, you practically have to drive all the way down to New York City and then start over. And I'm not joking. Like, there is no route directly between us, because it's the Catskill Mountains.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was just like, then you'd have to drive just straight up through the mountains.
Exactly. So, and I've tried to do that, and it's gone horribly wrong. So yeah, you basically go south for like 100 miles, and then you start to come back up, and that's how we get to each other's houses. But we actually both have places in apartments in New York, and our band rehearses in New York. And we have a recording studio, a real pro recording studio that we book time at in New York City. So New York is sort of the hub,
little hub
where everything gets done.
Gotcha. I was wondering about that because, like, I love also that it sounds like you need almost like a mixture or a balance of space and proximity to each other to create. I love that you kind of go into your corners and you fiddle with your little things and then you exchange them.
Yeah. No, it's that is how we've worked, and very, very rarely we've sat in a room together and written songs together. I almost feel like we're kind of wasting time both working on the same song at the same time, because it just feels sort of like both of our ideas are just as good, so we don't have to like sit together trying to hammer it out. And we have written a few songs that way, but mostly, yeah, we're kind of like squirreled away in our respective home studios, and that is perfectly agreeable way for us to get stuff done.
That's so cool, because also it shows how much you like trust each other with each other's ideas, to be like, nah, you got this, like send me what you got, and
well, yeah,
stuff on top of it, and like,
yeah, there's another sort of psychological element, which is, I always think like I'm coming up with something for They Might Be Giants, and I think, I don't know if John's going to really go for this, so I've got him in my head basically, you know, and that kind of affects it actually in a way intensifies the decision making, because I'm thinking, well, I kind of like this, but I think John is not going to like this. There's really no point in continuing. Like, let's go down a different alley here, and I think that he feels the same way.
I love that you've kind of internalized each other, like in your head, that you're like, would he be into this?
No, it's not true.
That's fascinating. It was kind of in the back of my mind what you said about how like kids are actually like really harsh critics of music, and I was curious, when you're writing for kids, what do you feel is different, and did you ever play your son music that was specifically for kids, or did you just play like everything?
Well, both. I will say, like, there is a difference, and the thing about kids is they don't. And we've said this before a million times, so this is kind of a canned response, but they don't think like rock critics, you know. And
Yeah.
the adults really tend to compare what they're listening to everything else they've ever heard.
Right.
All of us do that, and think, you know, well, this sounds derivative or whatever, and that's not really in a kid's mind. They
No.
hear something and they kind of hear it in a more open-ended way, which is nice, and it's a real privilege to write music for somebody who is listening in that way, because you can introduce an idea that, you know, you're kind of thinking this might be the first time they ever hear like a funk groove or whatever.
Mm,
So you don't have to try and top some other thing. You can just like have it be
right.
what it is, and not even have it be sort of self-conscious of its own genre, um, which is, you know, the way, in a way, I think we idealize that anyway when we're doing stuff for adults, is we want to think, what if you just created music from scratch? It's
Yeah.
impossible. You can't, but you can dream of doing it, and it's really much easier in a way to imagine doing that when you're writing music
Yeah.
for kids. You know, is that this is the first time, you know, this chord change has ever happened,
Right.
and it's uh it's nice to it's nice to think in those terms.
Because yeah, I think about like what I listened to as a kid, and I'm curious now what you listen to. And I didn't listen to a lot of what one would describe as kids'
It was,
music.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know, my brother listened to uh, um, I guess it was WMCA in New York, and they were playing the Beatles right when they arrived, and so there was this excitement about listening to the radio at that time. You
Yeah.
know, like all this stuff is happening, and it's bursting out of the radio, and my older siblings were just really into it, and so it seemed like music was just one of the most important things you could be paying attention to at that time. Uh, yeah, and then I started to realize, like, oh, there's all these different kinds of music, and they come from different times, and they have, so that, yeah, I think as I recall, when I met John Flansburgh, one of the things that struck me about him was that he was really interested in music and culture from way before either of us were born. Uh,
Mm.
he had, I mean, he had all these movie posters and things cut out all over his wall that were from the early part of the 20th century and stuff like that. And so it was kind of like, yeah, you can be the person picking your culture that you're into,
Mm.
and it can be something that none of your peers even know about, and that's a really exciting kind of idea, that you could
Choose
be
from.
discovering. There's so much stuff to discover, and I don't. It's funny. I think I've lost some of that feeling. I don't feel that way as much anymore. That, like, even though it's probably there's an infinite amount of stuff that I've never heard, but I remember that feeling of excitement as it being a kid, of like, oh my God, there's this whole other cool thing that I've never heard of.
Yeah.
You know.
I want to read more. They've been studying why, like when we're teenagers, why that's the music that we attach most to, and
Hmm.
why that's usually the art. And I mean, I'm sure it has something to do with like brain development at the time,
Yeah.
and our emotional development,
Yeah.
and identity formation. That it's like, even though there are new things out there, it might not speak to our identities in the same way as it did when we were like a kid or as a teenager. And to
Absolutely.
get back into that frame is so interesting to me, because yeah, like everything's new because you have no context.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're keying into something so interesting, which is that idea of your identity formation. And it's yeah, what's going on with that? It's like kids from a certain age up through their teens are obsessed with their identity, and and it and then you really you're forming stuff that when you get to be an old person, you're kind of like, well, I'm still, like still really a kind of a still kind of that thing, whatever that is, like
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to move on and reinvent after
Yeah.
something as intense as that.
And when did you meet each other? Like, how did you become friends?
Yeah. Well, we were in grade school together. So before we went to high school,
Oh.
I think we were a grade apart. So I
Uh-huh.
kind of knew about John. I knew that he was this interesting, creative kid, and he introduced himself to me, and he showed me some stuff he'd written, and
Mhm.
then when we got to high school, we both wound up on this high school newspaper, and there was we had a bunch of friends who were all involved in that, and I think all wanting to do some kind of creative work. And at that time, I'd been drawing cartoons up until that time, but then I started writing,
Mhm.
and I was just starting to play piano. And then as after I got to know John, he picked up the guitar. He wasn't a musician when I met him, but he decided he wanted to play the guitar, and he was kind of had this gradual program where he put two strings on the guitar and started learning how to play with just the two strings. And he was adding strings. This is his. He should write a book of that. Should be his guitar method, because that
Oh
was
my gosh.
how he began. Um, and although he had been interested in recording before then, so
Mhm.
I think the first things we ever did together was him operating the tape recorder, and I was playing like the plastic chord organ into um, uh, and then yeah, gradually we just got more and more into music.
Well, it sounds like you're both kind of critical for each other's identity formation.
I think to some extent, yeah, and the other friends that we had in high school, that
Yeah.
was a big part of how we, you know, became adults was by reinforcing and bouncing off each other. And I still have a lot of the same friends from that time. I'm still in touch with a bunch of the people I knew at that time, and I still feel that kind of like special sense of these are the
Yeah.
people. I mean, actually, before that, I would say it was my siblings. That as I was saying, my older brother and sister were tapping into stuff that I then
Yes.
found out about through them. So that was pretty important.
What was it like kind of like passing that on to then like the next generation? Because I think about that, like I think about like the music that my parents chose to play for me. Like,
Yeah,
and I don't know if they were just annoyed by kids' music or what was going on, but I mean, like, they just stayed away from that for the most part. Like,
yeah. I mean, I would say like we we did make uh we did make mix probably CDs for our son when he was little.
yeah.
So we were choosing that stuff, and we were deliberately, I would sort of like your folks, that we were deliberately shielding him from, Barney and Friends. Like we just were like, there were certain areas that we were blacking out because we like, I don't want to have to watch this. So, you know, but yeah, the funny thing is that my son wasn't really into music as a musician
Mhm.
until he was well into his teens.
Mm.
And then he had this explosion of interest, and he's now an accomplished guitarist and keyboard player, but he did not seem to want to do any of that stuff. When at the point where I was trying to encourage him, I
Yeah.
was trying to get him to play piano, and he was, I think, annoyed that I was pressuring him to do anything like that. But then he discovered it on his own,
Right.
um, and also he's discovered music on his own. He's
Yeah.
really learned about a lot of stuff that I didn't tell him about. And also he knows about a lot of stuff that younger people are tuned into that I'm completely unaware of at this point.
Yep.
You know?
That's what's really fun is like I think about when as an artist like having younger generations of people coming up to you and being like, have you seen this thing? And you're like, what? Like,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think he knows there's certain categories of things that I may or may not like, certain things that I won't like, and then certain things I will definitely like. And
mhm.
he's kind of selective about like he didn't push me into watching Squid Game for but eventually I was like, all right, you're watching this, I'll watch it with you. And I was like, yeah, I see why you like this.
Like I could get into this.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's like I realized I do the same for my parents now that I know like their taste because of what they showed me. That
Yeah.
I'm relatively good at then like almost like reverse curating. Like it sounds like you were curating for him and now he knows your taste and can like curate for you.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What I guess like what media have you been taking in that you feel like I guess like has kept you inspired? Because I mean you create things that inspire you, but are there any things around you that like
Well, yeah, I'd say like I was saying, often it isn't. It's not so much new music, unfortunately. Flansburgh is much more aware and tuned into trends in music than I am, and actually, I would say John has kind of provided a lot of the
mm.
like the access that I have to anything new, not just now, but even like for a long time. Just been aware. He's just been aware of like what's going on much more than I am. Uh, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've like the squarest. Like, I mean, I hate to even say this, but like I'll read an article in the New York Times about some new artist, and like
Mhm.
I am literally the last person to find out about that often. But I mean, that's that. At least I eventually do learn
Get
about
there.
it.
And it sounds like you're taking in something that's inspiring you because I think of it not even as media in the traditional sense, I guess, but it's like you have to take stuff in from your environment to let it kind of like cogitate and then like emotions and things come back out. It's like otherwise where would you get any sort of inspiration?
Yeah, yeah. Well, also, I mean, I suppose this sounds like a sort of an excuse, but I suppose you also have a backlog of things
True.
that you've
True.
always liked. Um,
That is true.
you can still run on that battery.
That's I was talking to another artist in an interview about like that she has such a vast catalog that when she tours again she's just like, oh, rehearsals are going to be a nightmare, that it's like this huge bag of like gemstones essentially that
Yeah,
you can draw upon, and in some ways that's good, but I don't know, maybe I'm just like a little magpie that I'm always like I want to collect more shiny things to fit in my bag
yeah,
that inspire me.
yeah. Well, I mean, speaking for my band, we don't know how to play all our songs by a long shot, but we'll pick out, 30, let's say 30 songs from the catalog and focus on those. And then
Mm,
we can make different sets based on that. And that's enough. And these guys have pretty good memories. So there are some ones that we learned long ago that we can quickly get back
yes,
up to speed, you know.
I
Uh,
love that when muscle memory kicks in and you're just like, oh good,
yeah,
that's still there.
it's pretty efficient group. And we've been playing with these guys for 20 years now, some
Wow.
of them more than 20 years. So yeah, they probably know stuff that we've forgotten. They could teach us our songs.
There you go. I guess like in closing, like what's coming next? Because you finished this album, you have the book. It's like, are you going to tour? Are you, because like the landscape of everything is so
Absolutely. Um,
I'm making a smushy gesture for those who cannot
yeah, no, it's very unclear. We are, well, we're going to be, we're booked to start touring next March. Um,
Mhm.
this the shows that we're doing, that we're scheduled to do in March, are shows that we were scheduled to do a year ago, and then they got
Yeah.
bumped again to now, and then bumped again to next spring. So I hope it's all going to happen then. I mean, like
Yeah.
obviously it'll be a different situation, and we will be very very vigilant about making sure everybody's safe.
Yes.
Um, uh, I'm not sure what form it'll take, but we want to make sure that people don't get sick coming to our shows. So that's super important. But we're basically going to pick up where we left off. We were going to do a whole retrospective of our Flood album, our third album.
Oh my gosh!
That's what we were planning to do for this tour that got bumped.
Yeah.
So it's like the Tokyo Olympics. We're just going to pretend, we're going to pretend that this year didn't happen and just 2020 tour, 2021.
I love that. Well, yeah, because I don't know if you've been back to any concerts. I've been to a few outdoor ones, and I went to one that was like a Vax only indoor, obviously like all masked.
Mm-hmm.
But just the experience of being able to share, particularly when you've made something that is so vibrant, it's like that's like it's like once you make an album, once you actually make this book, once you actually do the thing, like the sharing is the next part, because like you said, you're communicating with others, and that's
we miss it, and also we miss each other. I mean, that was the funny thing, is like about we saw these guys recently in the studio, and it was like, wow, it's you, like we kind of miss just hanging out. So we'll look forward to that. Hopefully, we've done tours that were so long that we really start to take each other for granted. We're like, okay,
yeah.
But I think now we're sort of feeling like, I've been alone in the house for too long.
Yeah, it'll be good to be back together, and I'm sure that all of the audiences are going to be very excited to be there.
It'll be great. I know it's going to be great once it gets going.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, whatever this is. I feel like we're all in this liminal space on the internet together.
Yeah, well, again, my pleasure. And
thank you again for listening to this episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and on Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who is literally a rock star. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.